Welcome, listeners, to Talking Eyes. I'm your host, Leanne Trin, an optometrist and public health clinician based in Larrakia Country, also known as Darwin, in the Northern Territory of Australia. This podcast was created to translate exciting, innovative developments from vision research into a form that both clinicians and really any curious mind can understand. Innovation, simplicity, clarity. This series will be diving into a topic where the research has been absolutely awe-inspiring. The retina. It's just a small part of the human eye, roughly the size of a postage stamp, but it's an incredible piece of human biology that plays a central role in how we experience the world around us. Diets don't work. It's clear. And what I mean by that is that the latest nutrition research finds that it is really, really challenging for people to change what they eat in the long run. So, where does that information leave you when the goal is disease prevention, preventing macular degeneration, for instance? And we want to modify that supposedly modifiable risk factor of diet. Well, welcome to Feeding Your Eyes, an introductory episode on nutrition and the potential role of supplements as part of our Talking Retina series. I warmly welcome our first international guest to this Australian podcast, Professor John Nolan from the Nutrition Research Centre at the Southeast Technological University in the Republic of Ireland. John is known for his groundbreaking research on macular pigments and their impact on vision. His passion is all about optimizing visual performance, and today he joins us to discuss the critical roles of lutein, zeaxanthin and mesozeaxanthin in maintaining retinal health and maybe brain health as well. We're going to touch on those really famous landmark studies, the age-related eye disease studies, also known as ARIDS and ARIDS 2. But our discussion moves into the very interesting realm of what healthcare now, healthcare 3.0, might look like. John, can we talk about your background a little bit, how you came into this actually quite niche area? Because when people do research on the eye, nutrition is generally not at the forefront of their mind.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to maybe explain that, because it's kind of opportunistic and it's important. I studied science, and I'm a scientist. Biochemistry was my specialty, and coming from school where I enjoyed science but wasn't very good at it, into university where it started to make sense and I started to become very good at it. I was just amazed with, I suppose at that time we were starting to get access to technologies as scientists that were really like informative, and even at that time to be able to work with systems called HPLCs, high performance liquid chromatography systems, that allowed us kind of separate molecules and from each other and so on. I was fascinated by that, but my real passion was human health and human function, probably because as a kid and in my teens and early adulthood, I had a big, and still do have a big, love for sport. I applied essentially for a PhD program. It was a program that was funded by a charity in Ireland called Fighting Blindness Ireland, but via a donor. And the donor is very famous internationally. You've probably heard of the Irish River Dance. There was a lady called Maya Doherty who basically donated funds to the charity for research into a disease called age-related macular degeneration. And the reason why she did that was because her own mother was suffering really badly with the disease. And essentially she wanted to work with the university and with scientists and doctors to see if we could try and find new avenues of opportunity of treatment to help with this condition. So the PhD program got funded at my university, and the research question within that program was to see if the condition age-related macular degeneration had any link or connection to what we call modifiable risk factors, and nutrition being a part of that. And how we addressed that research question was to measure risk factors for the disease in a large sample of the Irish population. So essentially, nearly 1,000 people we worked with, and we were measuring their various degrees of whether their likelihood of developing macular degeneration, age-related macular degeneration. And this was based on knowledge around established risk factors like genetics.
What year was that, John?
Oh,
Was that pre or post the ARID studies?
Oh, that was a long time before that. And I'm glad you asked, because essentially the research question that I proposed and what I conclude in my own dissertation long before the ARIDS was, look, was the biologically plausible rationale whereby we can optimize nutrients in the eye that have this protective, this antioxidant effect. And that if we were to do that, we could protect the tissues of the eye. Because what my PhD had demonstrated was that the people who are at high risk of getting macular degeneration had this deficiency in this nutritional pigment, which we know as macular pigment. At that time, it was believed macular pigment was comprised solely of lutein and zeaxanthin. But the further on studies demonstrated that there was this other carotenoid, and we should explain, of course, what carotenoids are, called mesozeaxanthin. So essentially what I'm saying is that we discovered that this nutritional pigment that is highly concentrated in the back of the eye was lacking in patients at risk of macular degeneration. So kind of closed the loop between risk factors for this condition, which is the world's leading cause of blindness, versus modifiable factors, and nutrition being a major player in that. I published my dissertation in 2005, so there's over 20 years of kind of science gone into this. The research that has followed has really been to try and understand, what is macular pigment? How do we enrich it? What is that a good thing when we do that? Who should we do that for? How much of the nutrients should we do? Should we just use nutrition, or is there a role for supplementation? And there's been a lot of really important discoveries along the way that thankfully now across the world, I can say people are really benefiting from, in terms of the published works that we've been involved in, starting in Ireland and then across Europe, and even I know in Australia now there's organizations now thankfully about to take advantage of this, if you like, to try and help doctors and patients make an informed scientific decision. So I suppose what I'm saying is, beyond the scientific discoveries, the patents, the publications, it's the real success is that humans benefit. And they do so because we've been able to develop, test and implement safe supplement formulations for everyone. And that may be where our conversation gets interesting. It's not for people just with the disease macular degeneration. It's for everybody else.
Your body needs a whole range of substances like vitamins and minerals to function properly. Many of these, like vitamin A and C, are called essential, meaning we can't actually make them. And when we don't consume them, our cells malfunction and bad things happen. Take, for instance, scurvy, a disease that was made famous by sailors and pirates. They relied on non-perishable foods when they were out at sea, and they lacked a fresh food supply. Importantly, they lacked vitamin C. Their symptoms were terrible, and they were dramatically described in an 1820 text on nautical medicine by a Navy surgeon, Usher Parsons. He's awfully descriptive. Gums become livid, soft and swollen, apt to bleed from the slightest cause and separate from teeth. First the legs, then other parts of the body swell. They're glossy and soon exhibit foul ulcers. Bleeding occurs at the nose and mouth. Death closes the scene. Vitamin C supplements. That's what they would have needed. Look, a study published in the journal Nutrients in 2017 estimates that 43% of us adults, that's about 900,000 Australians, are taking at least one type of supplement regularly. Supplements first became available back in the 1940s when scientists were able to isolate and recreate all sorts of substances. And they formulated lots of complex and interesting isolates that sound like they do lots of complex and amazing things. You may have noticed that the popularity of the supplementation aisle at your local pharmacy and even supermarket has exploded over the last few decades. Now, this explosion, interestingly, seems to have coincided with the US FDA Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act passing into law, and that was in 1994. And that's where they created a definition for supplements. Supplements can be vitamins, minerals, herbs, other botanicals, amino acids, animal-derived products, hormones, hormone analogues, enzymes, concentrates, metabolites, constituents, or extracts of these. Now, you just need to remember that what you get in your powders, your gels, or your magic pills all come from a largely self-regulated industry.
The problem is, and to answer your point, I think the whole world is exploding in terms of supplement use. And maybe during the pandemic, this got accelerated and exaggerated because everyone was trying to do everything that they could do to make themselves healthier. So we'd more time to think, we'd more time to read, we'd more time to reflect, me included, by the way. And we got to think, well, are there certain vitamins, minerals, antioxidants that we should be consuming that are going to give us a better health benefit? And and add to that, we live in a world that has a massively growing population and an aging population. And the aging population, everyone is really pleased with, but I'm quite terrified by it as a nutritional biochemist, because I celebrate it. I want to live long. I want my parents to live long. But really, we should only celebrate it if we know how to retain our functions as we age and have a quality of life as we age. That's really key to health and wellness, isn't it? I think I say this a lot actually in lectures of late, you know, and let me just be a little bit challenging and provocative if I can for a second. The advice maybe that general practitioners might give, or who, by the way, I have the utmost respect for, but the advice would be to, you need to eat well and be better and, eat your 5 a day. I mean, that's kind of useless information, right? Because, like, honestly, I'm a nutritional scientist and I can't do it. And I have 2 young kids and I do my best. God, it's difficult to keep them doing the right thing with nutrition. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't advise that. That's the pillar of life. The pillar of is eat well, be healthy, be well. But honestly, and I think that we live in a time where science has delivered a lot
Look,
more.
I agree with you, John. Like, I actually think there's a very small subsection of society who can follow
Mm.
that advice and eat well. The
Oh,
Kim Kardashians of our society who can eat well, exercise as they should, and have that wonderful quality of life. But if you're a real person with kids,
mm,
with, a life going on, with a job, with other priorities. And, I actually work out in remote communities. So the type of nutrition that's available as well is
yeah,
really limited and it's really expensive. The advice is fantastic. I mean, it's spot on. We should be doing those things. But how can that advice be, more relevant?
yeah, absolutely. And the other thing to say on that point is, you know, when you look at plant-based foods, which is the go-to recommendation, understandably, you know, we plants are good for us because they contain fiber typically, but they also contain nutrients that have these essential nutrients that we're looking to consume. In my case, I'm very interested, and my knowledge is in the area of carotenoids. But unfortunately, the plants that are good for us are devolving in their nutritional value and benefit because of intense farming. So, what do I mean by that? When you look at a plant, for example, the reason why these really good antioxidants are in the plant is to help the plant. The plant doesn't really care about a human. So, marigolds will grow in really hot environments in Mexico, because of this high amount of a carotenoid called lutein and zeaxanthin that's present in it. When you make it easy for plants to grow, what happens is you suppress the amount of those particular carotenoids. And we've data now from the American Department of Agriculture showing that over a 50-year period, that portions, so take spinach for example, you'd have to consume, I think it's 50 times more portions of spinach today than you would have 100 years ago to get the same nutritional benefit. So nutritional value of plants is just it's another challenge that we have to contend with.
Yeah, that's a whole different episode, I reckon, agriculture and nutrition.
Yeah.
Many of you will be well familiar with the age-related eye disease study, ARIDS. And many of you will already be providing nutrition supplementation advice or taking supplements based on the findings of these landmark studies. Now, the first ARIDS was conducted between 1992 and 2001, over 20 years ago. And it was testing whether a specific cocktail of vitamins and minerals could reduce the risk of developing age-related macular degeneration, AMD. It was a particular formulation of powerful antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E, a synthetic carotenoid equivalent called beta-carotene, a very high concentration of the essential mineral zinc, and a dose of copper to reduce the possibility of copper deficiency anemia, which can happen when you take high levels of zinc. Now, this formulation seems to reduce the risk of people only with intermediate AMD from progressing to advanced AMD. And that risk reduction is quantified at about 25% over 5 years, so pretty significant. The second study, the ARIDS 2, showed similar effects when beta-carotene was replaced with the pigments lutein and zeaxanthin, and much less zinc. John and I spoke about some of the shortcomings of the studies.
I'm glad you mentioned the ARID study as well, because everyone defaults to it, and I'm very complimentary to what the ARID study told us in terms of morphology. But I would say that the ARID study is remarkably old in terms of, and there's been a lot of really good science that's happened since. A couple of issues with it. So, high zinc, 80 milligrams of zinc is way too much zinc.
Yeah. But the subsequent study demonstrated an equivalent effect with 25 milligrams.
That's correct. So I'd be if I was to do an ARIDS like formula, I would do a formula that has low zinc at 25, because there was no difference. But I mean, the reality is the reason why it's highly recommended now is that the patent was with the 80 milligrams, and that's the one that's sold in the pharmacy. And that's just a statement of fact.
So the second ARID study attempted to demonstrate some sort of additional action of omega-3. Was it able to do that?
No. And it's very controversial. And, I believe omega is very important for eye and brain. No question. Omega is the building blocks of the photoreceptors. The second ARIDS 2 study, people don't really understand it insofar as there was no placebo. Everyone was given the original ARIDS formula. So we weren't dealing with real humans with the condition. And essentially they were saying, we're going to give you all this carnival of antioxidants, and now we're going to throw lutein, zeaxanthin on top of that. Okay, because they added lutein, zeaxanthin, took out the beta carotene.
And they had the problems with the beta carotene, didn't they?
Yeah. So for the data with beta carotene is interesting. Maybe it's controversial, but if reading the published studies, you see that for cigarette smokers, there's an increased risk of lung cancer. And for me, as a nutritional biochemist, I was, so for example, the benefit that the ARIDS could exhibit, with zinc, as you say, and so on. They had beta carotene in the original ARIDS formula. That was going to be a systemic benefit, because those nutrients aren't stored at the retina, so it's going to have to be kind of a systemic effect, which is interesting. But the localized nutrients that are the macular pigments, which are these carotenoids. So basically from 700 carotenoids in nature. So just for your listeners' benefit, when you look at color in the world that's natural, in plants, in nature, in birds' feathers, in fish skin, in egg yolk, they're carotenoids. And what's really truly amazing is from the 700 carotenoids that's in nature, we consume about 50, but our blood system, which I refer to as our taxi system, carries about 18 of those and deposits them and concentrates them in various tissues across the body. And the eye selects 3 carotenoids, and that's the lutein, the zeaxanthin, and the mesozeaxanthin. And we concentrate it there in really high amounts. And the reason why that's so beneficial is because the retina, which is a light sensitive tissue, which in time and with age and with high risk will get very sick. And it gets sick because of something called oxidative stress, which is basically just the cost of the tissue being alive and working really hard. And as it works really hard, it's metabolizing oxygen. And as it metabolizes oxygen, there's a cost to that. And the cost of that is a free radical production, essentially, which is basically a molecule that's missing an electron. So it's unhappy, it's unstable. And what that radical does is it will attack the stable cells in the photoreceptors in the eye, and it'll basically make the eye get sick. And that's the start of macular degeneration. So the start of all sickness, in my view, is oxidative stress. Everything can be linked back to oxidative stress. It's the trigger to all the insults that happen thereafter. And I always make the analogy, it's like when I explain it to my daughters about what I do, Penny and Bea are my daughters, and I say it's like when you fall outside off the swing or off your bike, the impact is the oxidative stress. And then everything that happens after that, the blood, the inflammation, the swelling, that's the body trying to fix itself. That's the reaction. And the same thing happens slowly and cumulatively as we age. And we have this imbalance and this inability to kind of deal with that stress as we get older and as our nutrition profiles change. And that's why, what if we can have a supplement that has the exact nutrients, which are remarkably safe and remarkably effective, and provide them in a supplement formulation, that we can kind of put sunscreen, if you like, in the areas of the body that we want. And that's what macular pigment is doing. It's giving that antioxidant effect.
The ARIDS-2 study was an attempt to refine the ARIDS formulation for retinal supplementation, and it was conducted over 6 years from 2006 to 2012. The results were actually somewhat disappointing to the research and clinical community. There was no perceived benefit with the addition of omega-3, and that had not been anticipated. And there seemed to be very little additional benefit over the original formula, despite a few tweaks. But it did confirm a potential role of lutein and zeaxanthin to reduce the risk of progression of macular degeneration, particularly in individuals who were not consuming sufficient amounts through their diet. John's been working on the central retinal enrichment supplementation trials, the CREST study. Investigations were conducted after the ARIDS-2 trials between 2010 and 2018, with some really interesting insights to mention.
When I was doing my studies, I didn't want the carnival of antioxidants. That I wanted to have a targeted, safe combination of the macular pigments, the lutein, the zeaxanthin, and a very powerful antioxidant called mesozeaxanthin, because I knew that was going to the macula. And I knew that people at risk of, like our earlier studies called the MOST studies, demonstrated that for people who had kind of these kind of atypical dips in their protective pigment, the only way to fix that was to provide the 3 carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, and meso. And this was exploratory work. This was single blind investigation, but it was providing this kind of pilot exploratory data, which was wonderful. And we kind of put it all together over a 10-year period. And we said, actually, we shouldn't be looking at just disease. We should be looking at visual functions. particularly a measure of in vision. You're an optometrist, right? So you'll be familiar with contrast sensitivity. What a wonderful measure of vision. Contrast sensitivity relates to how your patient feels about their vision, whether they have sick eyes or whether they're healthy. So essentially, what we did was I proposed that if we were to supplement with 22 milligrams of carotenoid, so it was 10 milligrams of lutein, 10 milligrams of mesozeaxanthin, and 2 milligrams of zeaxanthin, all sourced at high purity from the marigold flower. Essentially, how you get it is you cook a plant, and we call this saponification, which means you're getting rid of everything in the plant that you don't want. And as you do that, the carotenoids that are naturally present in the plant, the lutein and zeaxanthin, come out, and we get this formation of mesozeaxanthin.
Mm-hmm.
And that reason why that's really important is this carotenoid is the most concentrated carotenoid in the central macular pigment. What's interesting about mesozeaxanthin is we don't consume a lot of it from the diet. In a typical diet, we don't consume a lot. In fact, we don't consume a lot of carotenoids in a diet. We consume about 1.5 milligrams. So I'm working with about 22 milligrams because that's how deficient we are. We need that 22 milligrams to optimize our blood system, which thereafter optimizes our target tissues, our macular pigments, and our brain carotenoid concentrations, and so on. So we were able to produce this very stable formula. When we used the three carotenoids, the results we saw compared to just lutein intervention was far superior. Hence why I believe I'm saying there's new science since the ARIDS. And when I went to the government with the research grant, I applied for what's called the European Research, ERC, European Research Council funding, with a big idea. And my big idea was that we've identified a nutrient deficiency of the eye. We've identified that if we supplement with it over a 6 month to 12-month period, we should see improvements in visual function in healthy population.
Mm-hmm.
And I said also, unlike ARIDS, which looked at morphology, and concluded that we should only supplement people with intermediate AMD because that's what the study kind of had the effects on. I mean, that makes no sense. Think of what an antioxidant does. Why would we wait for someone to have intermediate AMD before we start optimizing their protective pigments? It just makes no sense.
The vitamins and minerals, obviously, that were supplemented weren't having an effect on the early AMD patients or the late AMD patients, interestingly. So,
yeah, I mean, based on that formulation, based on how they
based
measure
on that
things,
formulation, based on what
based
they were
on
measuring.
how they measure things.
Yes. So no visual function was measured in any of those studies.
Nothing.
Right.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
Yes. A vision study that doesn't measure vision. And that's my point. I'm not interested in the disease. I mean, I care about the disease and I don't want to have it. I don't want people I love to have it. But I'm interested in
You're
what's
always
happening.
Getting in before the disease happens, aren't
Exactly.
you?
So it's like the reason why I say it makes no sense just to do what the standard of care ARIDS suggests we do. It's equivalent to saying, let's just wait until we're a little bit sunburned before we'll start to put sunscreen on, but only on certain people. I mean, again, that makes no sense. I mean, an antioxidant is an antioxidant at a more interesting level then, from a vision perspective. And this is what ARIDS didn't do, and which is work we have done, is looked at vision. ARIDS was interested in morphology. So can I stop someone's disease getting worse? Yes or no? That's why studies like ARIDS needed like 5,000 people over a long period of times. And in medicine, everyone kind of says, oh, it's only a good study if it's 5,000 people and it's longitudinal. That large sample and longitudinal is great, but there's much more to science and experiments than I actually argue in the opposite direction sometimes. I prefer experiments that are well-defined, well-designed, well-controlled, that don't need 5,000 people to demonstrate how effective these nutrients can work. But it's different because in those cases we're powering our studies for function. So for example, I'm not interested really in the disease AMD or Alzheimer's, which is we should come to in a while. I'm really interested in, can we do something to enhance function in society?
Can we talk our listeners through the CREST study?
The CREST study was funded by the European government. We had two population groups of interest. One population group were the healthy, so your healthy patients or that had no retinal disease. They had low pigment to begin with. And in a placebo-controlled trial, which was basically a trial where 50% of the participants received the 10-10-2 macular pigments, and the other 50% received the placebo, which had no active material. So we showed that 100% of people on the active ingredients experienced an improvement in their macular pigments, and a significant number of those participants them achieved improvements in real world visual experience, particularly in the area of contrast sensitivity. And even we published a secondary paper showing that that had an improvement in their cognitive abilities, their memory, their attention, their reaction time. And then in the second element of the study, we worked with patients with early stage age-related macular degeneration. So they were AREDs basically 1 through 8. So they hadn't that more advanced, they hadn't lost their central vision essentially. But we know in those patients, their vision normally deteriorates quite quickly. So the primary outcome measure in that group was contrast sensitivity as well. So what we did in that study, it wasn't a placebo-controlled trial, it was a head-to-head trial, meaning that 50% of the patients got the AREDS-like formula, but with low zinc, and the other 50% got the AREDS-like formula, but with 10-10-2, the mesozeaxanthin, zeaxanthin, and lutein. And both groups did very well, but the group with the mesozeaxanthin did significantly better, particularly in the area of contrast sensitivity again. So it kind of validated our hypothesis that this was a really important ingredient to include, to add to what we'd already known. And we now have people have been on this intervention for over a decade now with and continued results. I actually have new data from Ireland that we look, if you look at population growth, aging population and so on, number of people predicted to go blind, number of people predicted to develop dementia. The one curve that we flattened is blindness. We haven't stopped people going blind. We haven't, macular degeneration is still very prevalent, but it hasn't grown at the rate, and we believe that that's in no small part due to the use of these nutrients. I did a count on the number of patients or humans rather that I've worked with insofar as that we've measured carotenoids, macular pigments related to some other outcome measure. And we're at 46,000 people that we've worked with over the time. So it's a big number when you look at the totality of the evidence. And also I would say that, many organizations and companies copy the ARED study. They copy that formulation now and so on. And that's fine. And doctors feel comfortable making a recommendation in that place. But I would say you would need to see if that particular formulation has been used in a clinical trial to demonstrate how effective it is. That's really important because all lutein's not the same.
Yes, I was going to
and all
ask
supplements
that
are not the
actually.
same.
Vitamin E, there are different variations.
Oh my God.
Lutein, different variations. Let's talk through that, John.
Yeah. So, well, I'd speak again in my comfort zone, which is carotenoids, and basically this protective pigment that's an antioxidant, that's an optical filter, that's an anti-inflammatory actually as well. We've a new paper coming out demonstrating that, which is really exciting. But they're sourced from flowers in Mexico, and we know the organization. And by the way, I don't own a supplement. I'm a scientist at a university. The intellectual property is licensed and used successfully by various organizations. And that's great because for me, that means that the science that we've done, that we've shown to be so effective, that if people follow the line back to what was done with what particular formulation, is there an efficacy? And in addition to that, are there stability programs? So I would tell you that 80% of eye supplement products in the pharmacy, 70% rather, will fail their label claim. So in other words, they may say they have 10 milligrams of lutein, they won't.
Yeah. That's huge.
Yeah, and we've actually demonstrated this quite recently, and we have a program from our university called Supplement Certified, which we now partner with lots of organizations across the world that want to show their doctors and their consumers that they're not only do they believe their supplements to have an effective property, but it's a really good quality product, that it's stable over the 2 years or 3 years of the shelf life.
Yeah.
And we found that out by mistake in a study we we were measuring in the blood carotenoids, and we saw carotenoids there that shouldn't have been there. And then
Right.
when we actually went back and looked at the supplement itself, we saw that it wasn't meeting label claim, and there was another carotenoid present that shouldn't have been. So it really opened up our interest into the quality piece about, you know, the journey that lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin go on by the
Mm.
time they get into a supplement formulation. They have to come
Yeah.
from a marigold. They have to be protected from oxidation and stored in a kind of an oil. So you protect them from light and oxygen. They have to get formulated by encapsulator. If they're done in powders, they're going to degrade within 30 days. If they're done in
Mm.
a proper soft gel, ideally, we use different types. We One of the most successful ones is we use a DHA omega oil,
Yes.
which gives additional benefits because of the DHA that's present. For your listeners, DHA is typically sourced from fish. Major component of the fats that are present in the brain. Itself has antioxidant benefits, but we've demonstrated a synergy between carotenoids and omega-3 provided together in a supplement. In
Mm.
terms of the bioavailability, you get a better response and a more stable product.
Now, I don't know about you, but I'm still reeling from this claim John has just made about the majority of ocular supplement products not meeting label claims. Whew. But on to omega 3s. We mentioned earlier that the ARIDS 2 study didn't appear to demonstrate any extra benefit from the addition of omega 3 to their supplement formulation. But it's important to realize that we know that omega 3 is important. It's an essential fatty acid, which means that human bodies can't make enough of it to adequately function. And so it does need to be consumed regularly. The retina, the brain, it's rich in the longer chain type of omega 3, which John has just mentioned, DHA, which we know is at least crucial for the structure and function of those retinal photoreceptor cells. Remember, these cells are constantly shedding and renewing their outer segment discs, converting light signals into biochemical signals, sending them to the brain to process sight. Also, remember that fatty acids work alongside a whole host of other components, other fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. It's this choreography and coordination of a dance, making sure we have the right dancers, the right number, the right size, the right environment. There are so many different factors at play which contribute to our physical health and well-being. And our ability to zoom out and see the bigger picture is important. But equally important is the ability to identify potential deficiencies and know that the supplement being recommended, being used, has what we need and will be effective.
You probably want your listeners and your doctors to realize, what should they do now. I think I think the certification programs are crucial, because one of the challenges we have, regardless of whether it's omegas or carotenoids, is that in food supplements, and the companies won't like me saying this, but a lot of it is self-regulated.
Mm.
And the regulatory bodies won't like me saying this. So what do I mean by that? So you and I could decide we want to sell a supplement. And we could say, okay, we're going to source omegas from Mexico, or carotenoids from Mexico, omegas from Norway. We'll put it together. We'll comply with what, let's just pick Ireland and Australia. We'll comply with what our governments say we need to do in terms of how we label and so on. And we'll tick the box that says we're providing X amount of carotenoid and omega, and on we go. And there's no requirement anywhere for testing. Now, good companies will test in-house. They'll have capacity to test in-house. But what I hope is that third-party testing becomes mandatory,
Mm.
because I believe in these foods and food supplements so much. I think we must insist upon a quality that is far superior to where we are now. And we need to draw a line between products and companies that are following the science and that are formulating in a way that is top quality to a lot of the noise out there. Because what we see happening in real time is companies or doctors even will be quite casual about their recommendation. The patient might leave the health or leave the doctor's clinic and go to a health food store and buy the cheapest one. They're not getting what they need. So the most expensive supplement that you'll buy is the one that doesn't work. So I never thought in my science that the biggest challenge would be regulatory and improving the quality and the requirement for quality in food and food supplements. And that's why our university, we developed what's called supplement certified. And it hasn't come to Australia yet. Started to explain and talk to organizations that I hope will become members of the program.
Yeah.
And all that is that they comply to, having their products tested for its label claim at initial point and over its shelf life. And that sounds like a basic requirement that any company should be, but people are
adhering
bypassing
to,
that.
absolutely. You should be purchasing the product as it is labelled, but it may not be the case.
No, it isn't, I promise
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Unless, so that's something to look out for.
While we know carotenoids for their presence in the eye as macular pigment, research has found forms of them in many other tissues of the body: the skin, the adrenal glands, the liver, and the brain. Lutein and zeaxanthin in particular have been found post-mortem in significant concentrations in the brain. And the concentrations at the macula have actually been found to correlate with concentrations in the brain. So we can think of macular pigment density not only serving as a biomarker for retinal health, but also for brain health. Because a number of observational studies over the last decade have highlighted potential benefits of these pigments for our brain, making associations with better cognitive performance and possibly protecting against cognitive decline.
In the earlier work, we showed that patients had improvements in their quality of life. So they still had Alzheimer's disease, but we increased their pigments. When we gave them carotenoids and omega, we saw a very clear picture. And this was reported by the primary care nurse. And we saw that they had significantly less issues with mood, improvements in memory. But that was done single blind. So then we had to go and do a double blind trial, which we ran and concluded during the pandemic, actually, which was remarkably difficult. But the data was equally impressive. And again, the what we call the clinical collateral. So the entire story was very clear. Those on the active intervention. And this was my colleague, Professor Rihanna Mulcahy, who was a PI at our centre now, Professor of Geriatric Medicine. They were her patients, essentially. She was a wonderful human being, wonderful person. She was just delighted to see what she was able to do with, nutritional supplements for her patients. And she's very skeptical about it, most medical doctors are. But now we published a paper in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, and the conclusion is that we have to use these targeted nutritional interventions in the co-management of the disease. Again, we're not saying that it's a treatment or anything of sorts, but it's the nice thing about these carotenoids, it has effect and they're affordable. We can get it, unlike pharmaceutical drugs. You look at the new Alzheimer's drugs, I think it's 80,000 euros per annum. Significant adverse effects, brain bleeds and so on. And I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I mean, I think the data there is very clear. Why would we not make available to all of these patients food and supplements that has these nutritional benefits?
Yeah, I was really interested to see the evolution of your conferences, actually, because initially the initial conferences around these macular pigments were based around the eye, and it's moved towards neurology, hasn't it?
Yes.
Because you've been able to demonstrate some remarkable effects from the supplementation of these pigments. And it stands to reason because the eye actually really is an extension of the brain. So
Absolutely.
when you say that the macula is or imaging these macular pigments is a biomarker for macular pigment in the brain. Because how else would we be visualizing these macular pigments in the brain? We can't.
Can't. Exactly.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing that we have access to the brain via the eye? It's to, as you say, it's to see. It's part of the brain. It's the part of central nervous system. It's the seeing part of the brain. You know, that little macula stimulates 50% of the brain when it lights it up. You know, it's
Incredible.
incredible. And I go provocative a little bit again, if I may. And I have, you know, I feel so grateful to medicine and to our health systems, which are totally overwhelmed. But they work and live in a world of what I call health 2.0. So health 1.0 was, let's stop people dying from infection. Health 2.0 was, okay, let's use standard of care licensed pharmaceutical treatments that the doctor is allowed to use based on scientific studies and so on. So we look at dementia, you look at age-related macular degeneration. The treatment, standard of care treatment isn't AREDS, actually. It's anti-VEGF treatments, right, for people with really sick eyes. It's dreadful. Okay, great success that we can reduce the leaking blood vessels, but my God, we have to do more than that. And the system is overwhelmed, and the doctors are afraid to make a recommendation. And if they do make a recommendation, they default to the AREDS recommendation because they think that that's the biggest study. But it's not the best study. And it's not the study that's given us most information.
So what should we be recommending then to our patients who are at risk of macular degeneration or have existing macular degeneration?
They can hopefully get educated and listen to, you know, podcasts like yours that are doing their best to communicate with scientists from all over the world to allow them have knowledge whereby if they were to make a recommendation earlier in the equation, that the totality of the evidence is very clear that there is an opportunity to improve the protective macular pigments. And if you do that, we need to turn this around and not try to fix diseases. We need to turn this around and optimize the environment of the eye, protect the eye for across all our ages. So carotenoids in nature, when a mother feeds a baby for the first time, are provided in the colostrum. So the yellow colostrum you see is the mother providing her baby with the most valuable nutrients. So we need these nutrients, as I say, from the cradle to the dance floor. We need them all through our life. And what we should do, and what I hope your profession does, is owns it and makes a recommendation and doesn't allow your patient leave without giving them that opportunity. And I think the best optometrists I know understand this and make a recommendation that has a scientific evidence base and makes a scientific recommendation that has with products that have a quality certified program connected to them, because we want our consumers, when they pay their money, to get what they're paying for. At least they deserve that. But I would like for healthcare, optometry in particular, to understand the wonderful visual benefits. You know, in our studies, we demonstrated that if you take a healthy patient with no retinal disease and change one thing, change their macular pigment, you'll improve their contrast sensitivity by about 15%. You'll reduce issues with glare, disability, driving. I'm now finishing a program with Sports Singapore as we're getting ready for the Olympics, all about optimizing the carotenoids for their high performance athletes, particularly in the area of shooting. It's called the Snipe Project for the archers and so on. So that's really exciting. So I think we need to turn it around.
Improving contrast sensitivity is such a great measure for me. Like, it makes so much sense. And I know that in patients who, for example, don't sleep well, the level of glare sensitivity, photophobia just shoots way up because they can't process all the waste overnight. And so they do have all these free radicals still floating around in their retina, and they are still really sensitive to light. So measuring contrast sensitivity is fantastic.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Wonderful.
It is. And we probably should be doing it more.
I mean, it's in all the visual systems that optometry, we just don't turn it on. It's there, and you can do it very quickly. You can measure contrast sensitivity at 6 cycles per degree. which is what Oseley and Sloan, they showed that contrast sensitivity at 6 cycles per degree correlates with real world visual experience. So how your patient feels. And that's why when you sit a patient in a chair and you're measuring their acuities and you're saying, well, your acuity is very good. And they're going, but doctor, I'm really not happy. Measure the contrast and you'll see something totally different.
There's a really interesting little video on your website, John. And after I watched that video, I was on smoothies for a week.
Michael Moseley, yeah. So this is the Trust Me, I'm a Doctor program, I think.
That's
right?
correct, yeah. So Michael Moseley exhibited some of your work, actually, and there was a little study that he did where there was a small number of participants who drank green smoothies for a week. Or how long was it? How long did it go on for?
Oh, it went on for a couple of weeks. Yeah, it went on for, I think it was 4 weeks. It was about 4 weeks. And you're right, we had to make those smoothies. But Michael didn't want to take the smoothies. And by the way, when he came to do this video, it was kind of in parallel with Crest because he was impressed with the data. He really kind of he does this to show that things don't work.
Yeah.
He was
came
wrong
in with a
because
skeptical mind, but he pretended to be really open to it.
yeah, exactly. But he kind of concluded, as you probably saw from the video, that in this occasion, there was really something in this.
You could see that he was quite surprised. I've got to say, though, something about the green smoothies was actually really beneficial. And I don't know whether you can capture this in a pill, but it actually made me want to be a healthier person.
Yeah. Right. The one issue with the green smoothie, and I take a smoothie, is they were very expensive. It was significantly more expensive than getting the supplement. It couldn't get meso into it. The meso
you couldn't get meso?
No.
Because why not?
Because when you're using basically kale and spinach and to make the green smoothie, and meso's not present in so you can get meso only from the supplement, because as it's still natural, it still comes from the marigold, but basically as you're cooking the plant, the lutein is being converted into meso. Right. Meso is identical to lutein. It's an isomer of lutein, but there's a difference in the location of a double bond in the hydroxyl group.
Right.
And it just makes it a more powerful antioxidant. And here's what's really amazing is the eye knows this too, because the eye converts the lutein in the retina. But what we know is not everyone can do that. And that's where the discovery is. For the people who can't get the meso from their own lutein, when you provide it, they get a great result.
Yeah.
And remember in the BBC, the Moseley study, the improvements. By the way, I really started all of this research wanting to fix the world with nutrition. And nutrition is wonderful. I mean, I run the Nutrition Research Centre, but I'm totally comfortable to say that it's time to prescribe food supplements
that we can prescribe. And so if we're prescribing these supplements now, who should we be prescribing to?
Anyone who wants to have best vision, and which is now in optometry a big thing. People don't just want spectacles; they want to know what can they do for the vision. And I'd say ask your patients one question: do you have any issues with visual functions in driving or in sporting environments? And if there was something that could help you with that, would you be interested? So that's kind of number one go-to. Number two would be obviously anyone who's well worried about macular degeneration. And maybe people sometimes say to me, oh, but it's easy for you to say, but the cost of doing this. And I'm like, yeah, I use toothpaste every day too. There's certain things that have a real benefit. So that's kind of, so that's who is anyone who wants to be informed about what they can do that's best for them, and knowing that people that do it earlier are going to reduce their risk in later years. That's crucial. So that's the who. And even age doesn't matter to me. We're doing lots of work at the moment, even with functional foods, where we've made carotenoid yogurts for kids.
Yeah.
Going to schools, all of this stuff. Maybe even energy drinks and drinks that people are using in sporting environment, isotonics that have natural carotenoids as opposed to these other ones. So there's an opportunity.
So many people have been inspired by you as well, John. There was a story of a farmer in the United States who attended one of your conferences, and he ended up looking at how to integrate more of this stuff into his corn that he was growing. So he was
Torbet.
Yes.
I think that's Torbet. Yeah. So he does a lot of work with carotenoids. And he's done a lot of great work in Africa. He came to our conference. I think what he said was he couldn't believe that the amount of data that was present, and not just from my lab, but from the wonderful scientists all over the world, that were able to show that if you optimize these particular nutrients, you can not just enhance vision, the cognitive function, and the new work we've done in Alzheimer's disease, which is remarkably important. When you look at Alzheimer's disease and the amount of money that's been spent, billions of dollars, looking for the silver bullet treatment of a plaque. Again, it's like trying to fix drusen, let's stop it happening in the first place, or reduce it happening. And let's, I think trying to fixing a plaque doesn't mean the brain is going to work again. It just doesn't. But maybe having the carotenoids optimized within the gap junctions will keep the network connected and firing and healthy.
And dietary recommendations, I guess. Yeah. I think it's important that we need to be able to make dietary recommendations. I think, 100%. We should be able to try to assess where the person is at on their journey. I think that's really important, and how accessible things are to them, where they are on their exercise journey, where they are on their dietary journey, and then the advice of supplementation should also be at the forefront of our minds, particularly with the work that you've been doing, John, over the past 20 years. So in terms of dietary advice that we should be looking to provide to patients, John?
So I'm a big fan of eggs. I'm a big fan of eggs as a really good factory of nutrition.
This is so interesting because we get such conflicting advice, generally speaking, don't we? Like eggs has been implicated for high cholesterol.
That's nonsense. Cholesterol is wonderfully important for us. We don't live without cholesterol because it's how we transport the fat-soluble essential nutrients that we need is via cholesterol. And we can talk about HDL, good cholesterol, and LDL, bad cholesterol, and so on. And we should. I mean, let's keep it simple. If you eat really bad foods, you'll have high cholesterol and you'll have the wrong type, and that can be problematic and contribute to kind of...
And for you, really bad foods are...
For me, high fatty foods, everything we know about our takeaways, high saturated fats.
So all that stands. You're highly processed.
Highly processed. That's just...
Yeah.
And look, that it's a vicious cycle and circle insofar as, how well a human can respond to a nutritional intervention is impeded upon based on their body status, right? Because our body fat competes with our eye for good nutrients. It stores them. Mm-hmm. So our reservoirs get bigger the more fat we have. So it becomes more challenging. It becomes more challenging.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Vitamin E, for example, gets stored in adipose tissue. And so the amount of vitamin E that is recommended to patients really needs to be varied based on their physical attributes, doesn't it?
Absolutely, like a customization of it. And that's why even with carotenoid intervention, people say, how long will it take for a nose to... Well, it takes 10 days for your blood to be optimized. We start to see small changes in the eye at 6 months. So it shows you how much of a reservoir we have to kind of, support. I would comply to the balanced diet, a little bit of everything. I think that's... I'm not an extremist in any way in terms of I'll never eat meat or, I just
only eat meat
or only eat meat. I'm on none of those teams. I eat what my wonderful wife makes available to me, and sometimes I make available to her much less now. I'm cognizant and I'm sensitive to everything that we should be doing right in terms of the environment and sustainability. Obviously, all of that. But I think we've been eating meat for a long time as humans, and fish is something that I really recommend because of omegas as well. It's wonderful if you can get good fish. I mentioned the eggs already. I think I'd have eggs every day. I mean, I'm not sure if people realize, but the reason why eggs got such bad business was because of the emergence of cereal companies who wanted to create a narrative. Did you know that? So,
No.
if you look back at those studies, they were supported by cereal companies who
Wow.
wanted to get people off eggs and onto their high
Onto
fructose
cereals for
cereal.
breakfast. Yeah, well, actually, my husband and I were discussing cereal because we don't feed our kids cereals. They sort of look at them in the supermarkets and go, "What's Fruit Loops? What's Nutrigrain?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh, lollies for breakfast, guys." So that's really interesting that eggs were replaced by marketing.
We did a whole series of egg studies, and cholesterol went up, but we actually profiled the ratio of LDL to HDL, and the LDL, the bad cholesterol, didn't go up. The HDL went up. So we created a high cholesterol environment, but with the much better type of cholesterol that you want. And these were people eating 2 eggs a day for 8 weeks, and eggs are just super.
I thought a good person to ask for dietary advice for retinal health would be a nutritional therapist from Cardiff in South Wales. Hannah Nunn runs a Facebook support group called Nutrition for Age-Related Macular Degeneration. And it's a wonderful initiative that provides much needed support and general nutrition and lifestyle advice to people living with the condition.
So my dad had macular degeneration, and it went right to the advanced stage where he lost his central vision. And he was one to sort of not complain, not talk about it much. But it was while I was studying nutrition that I became aware of his difficulties. And I joined some support groups, sort of looking for ways to help him, really, sort of practical ways. But I became aware of people's anxieties and concerns around this diagnosis. And I just started asking the question, is this an area that I could help people with nutrition? And started researching. My best advice to anybody with age-related macular degeneration would be to focus on eating a whole food, unprocessed diet. A whole food diet is a nutrient-dense diet. A processed food diet is a nutrient-deficient diet. A whole food diet is anti-inflammatory, whereas a processed food diet is highly inflammatory. It's full of toxins and chemicals and just doesn't give us what we need. So if I could just give them one piece of advice, that would be it. Remove the ultra-processed packaged foods.
And that could be really tricky for people, can't it?
Yeah, I think first of all, those ultra-processed foods are highly addictive. So often people come and say, "Oh, I wish I could change my diet, but I've got no self-control." And you say, well, actually, it's not necessarily about you. It is the foods themselves are highly addictive. So that's something to recognise. And yeah, that's where my role as a nutritional therapist comes in as well, is enabling people to make the changes. So working together with them. We look at their situation, their, likes and dislikes, their food preferences. It can, culture can come into it. And we look at all these things and we come up with a personalised plan for them. It may be that they have to, cook for their fussy husband or their fussy kids as well, or they've got to eat out with work, or they just have very, very little time to cook. So all of those things we would take into account and try and find an achievable plan for them. And then I would say focus on a plant-based diet. And that doesn't necessarily mean go vegetarian or vegan. I just mean eat lots of plant foods. And that includes fruit and veg, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, because these are high in vitamins and minerals, high in antioxidants. They fight inflammation. Our gut microbes love them. Within that, I would try and include daily your dark leafy greens for your lutein and zeaxanthin. I would try and include daily your berries, especially blueberries and other dark coloured berries. They contain something called anthocyanins, which we know are amazing for fighting inflammation, high in antioxidants, great for vascular health. But also focus on eating all the different coloured fruits and veg. So eat a rainbow, I say to my clients, because every one of those colours is representing a different powerful plant compound, and you want all of them to help you in your fight against inflammation. So it's eating all the colours of the rainbow, getting this diversity. Another thing I would recommend is including oily fish 2 to 3 times a week. That's your smash fish, so sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, herring. Those are high in omega-3 fatty acids, which have an anti-inflammatory effect in the body, and again support vascular health.
Now, it may come as a surprise to some of us really eyeball-focused clinicians, but these amazing little organs are actually connected to the rest of a human body. The Macular Disease Foundation Australia, they recently launched an updated nutrition guideline for people with age-related macular degeneration. And these guidelines suggest that improving our eating patterns rather than focusing solely on specific foods can prevent and slow down the progression of disease. The Mediterranean and the Asian diets have been identified, probably because they are rich in fresh, whole foods. And while we may not all be nutritionists, listening to and passing on some of Hannah's advice may result in the better outcomes for vision and overall health and well-being that we're looking for. Now, with respect to lutein, zeaxanthin and mesozeaxanthin supplementation, the evidence is really compelling.
Your patient wants you to tell them what to do, and if you can get familiar with the evidence, move beyond the ARIDS, respect the ARIDS, understand what it's taught us, but there's a lot of new science now. If you want to make vision better for your patients, enhance contrast sensitivity, have the conversation about how these nutrients can work for them.
Thanks for listening to Talking Eyes. Additional resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. If you found the content of our podcast interesting, feel free to post a great review and share it with your community. If you have a topic you'd like to hear more about, or have expertise in the field of vision and would like to contribute to future series, contact me via our socials on Facebook and Instagram. I'm Leanne Trin, your host of Talking Eyes.